Everyone. It's lovely to see some familiar names and new names. What you're seeing here is some of the program of the GFA. We are just one of many events that are happening over the next month. For those of you who don't know, who are new to the GFA, this is the Global Fashioning Assembly, an assembly that's been happening annually for the last few years, starting in 2022. It is a global gathering of local fashion communities with the aim to decenter and decolonize knowledge creation, and a place to share fashioning practices and disrupt western-centric approach to these kind of fashion gatherings. So there is here a link to a Miro board. So we really wanted this event to be participatory. So we actually have a whiteboard that we're going to be using, but there is also a Miro board which you can input any thoughts and reflections you have during today's program. So hello and welcome to Reclaiming Community Practices from Fashion Industry to Fashion Commons. This is an event today hosted by our Common Market as part of the Global Fashioning Assembly. And OCM, our Common Market, is also kindly supported by the European Cultural Foundation. I'm Sarah Arnold, today's moderator. So our Common Market is a new online hub for community-based clothing and textile practices. It is powered by Fashion Act Now, which is a London-based global activist group standing for what we call defashion. Defashion is a kind of radical perspective on decoloniality in fashion, and this is our link to the GFA. So we are now exceeding 7 out of 9 planetary boundaries. So our social metabolism should be rapidly shrinking, but instead it continues to grow. And we face nothing less than a civilizational crisis. And if fashion reflects society, then reforming fashion should mean no less than transforming humanity. Degrowth is actually not about critiquing growth itself, but growth for growth's sake. It is about downscaling, not through recession, but through intentional system change that reduces inequality, increases human well-being, and lets nature thrive. Degrowth asserts Latouche considered degrowth actually not as an economic project, but as an exiting of the economy altogether. He challenged that we see human relations in terms of producer and consumer as these calculable economic functions. And I also want to reference sociologist Miriam Lang, who views the roots of our problem as our epistemological assumptions. For example, that we see a separation of culture and nature, and we use knowledge to control, dominate, and transform. In modernity, infinite progress and this pursuit of optimization are assumed truths. And by categorizing much of the world as poor and primitive, this kind of regime has expanded through the global south under a guise of development. In England, where I am today, we have 1% of the population now owning 50% of the land. It was long ago that privatization here meant that the commoners were forced off common land. No longer could they then depend on the land to grow what they need for food together and access housing and so on. They were forced to become wage laborers, competing to maximize productivity. And this creates profits for corporations and those that own the means of production. These profits are then reinvested, resulting in exponential growth at the expense of all life on Earth. Life in the commons is centered around a community's reproduction of life, whereas in capitalism, life is centered around productivity. So instead of having nature and community as sustenance and survival, we then have to produce things. So fashion expresses our relationality with our environments. It should exist in diverse plurality. But instead, under capitalism, what we see is this kind of one dominant fashion system that has emerged. And within Fashion Act now, we call this fashion with a capital F. This fashion has spread through colonialism. It became instrumental in denoting the colonial difference. Those with fashion, the colonizers, seen as civilized, and those without fashion deemed primitive. Today, fashion expresses our worthiness and relationality within modern fossil-fueled capitalist society. Alienated from the means to provision within our communities, individuals compete to fend for themselves. Fashion is this process of individualization, of developing the project of oneself and forging our position in society. It reflects an unlimited desire for self-growth in a world in which the individual is insecure and isolated. Belonging in this modern society means fashioning ourselves to ever-changing codes, desperately imitating that sense of community lost. And the industry exploits these dynamics. Defashion is about moving away from this civilization's monocultural fashion system. It implies a paradigm shift to other ways of being and knowing. Today, from a European perspective, we'll vision a transition to alternative community-based fashion systems. Now more than ever, we need to be painting a picture of how we can address the climate and ecological emergency in a way that is desirable and just. How can we help provide security for those feeling insecure, left behind, or bearing the brunt of the change needed? A transition in Europe must consider local communities, rural and urban, but also its global responsibilities. So for the next 2 hours, we'll be listening to our incredible speakers. And in part 2 of the program, we encourage you to stay for a sharing council as a time of reflection. After a 1-hour meal break, we'll be rejoining to open up a space for collaboration. And in this, we ask you all, how can we come together to accelerate change? And what is our common ground? And how can we build upon that? So without further ado, I'm going to pass you on to Karishma Kelsey, who will talk more about the Commons. She is a member of Fashion Act Now and the RCDF. She is an educator, designer, activist, researcher, and radical entrepreneur hybrid with a focus on rewilding society from an Indigenous perspective. So over to you, Karishma.
Hi, everyone. So I'd like to just start with a thought. What if fashion, instead of being this cause of environmental degradation, cultural erasure, was actually now a force of healing? What if we moved away from this current system that exploits people and planet towards this common-based system that rejuvenates, uplifts, and connects us all? Now, I grew up in rural South Africa in a little town called Redcliffe, a small community where everyone knew everyone and all our resources were shared. It was a community that lived in what we would today call the commons, a place of connection, care, and reciprocity. Now, my grandmother, among her many other custodian duties, was actually the seed bank. And every year, she and all the other grandmothers in the community would come together and sort out the seeds, and then collectively decide on the crops they were going to plant and how they were going to plant it based on what was happening with the earth in that particular time. And before harvest, the best crops were often then gathered and offered back to Mother Earth. Now, this was not just a tradition. It was not just a community prayer. It was a way of showing deep respect and gratitude for the land that had nurtured us and had cared for us. Now, as I entered into the fashion world, I reflected on these experiences because fashion for me feels so far removed from these values of care, of reciprocity, and of togetherness. But what if it didn't have to be? What if fashion could claim its roots in the commons again? Now, on the slide in front of you, you will see a quote from Tyson Yunkaporta where he actually so beautifully describes the state of our world today. And for me and for us and fashion has actually become one of these artificial simplicities, a system that is now designed to control, to consume, and to radically disconnect. It no longer reflects the complexities of life, of culture, and the earth, but has become something that is disposable, detached from the hands that have actually made them and the land that has actually given birth to it. But what if fashion could return to this true essence? What if it reflected the regenerative cycles of the earth, cycles of care, cycles of deep connection? What if clothing enterprises were not driven by profit, but actually by care for people and planet? Now, I'd like us all to pause for a moment. Let's close our eyes and let's exhale the narrative that's on the screen. And let's take a moment to imagine a different world. Imagine walking through a lush, bustling market, not one of mass-produced clothing, but one where every garment carries a story. You can feel the textures of the clothing made from the fibers grown in the harmony of the earth, dyed with natural pigments that reflect all of the land around it. Every piece of clothing is crafted by hands that understand the rhythms and the seasons, the cycles of life and renewal. You hear conversations, not about profit, but about stories embedded in each garment. That dress that you've just tried on, that was woven by a local weaver whose craft was passed down for generations. And that wool sweater, touch it. It's made from beautiful, beautiful wool that actually comes from the animals that are cared for in a regenerative space, totally in balance. Now, this is not some far-off dream. What we're actually imagining is a return to practices that Indigenous communities have followed for centuries all across the world. Practices that are grounded in the concept of guardianship, the concept of kaitiakitanga, where respect and reciprocity live in harmony. The giving and the receiving, taking from the land, is always in balance. In Te Reo Māori, we refer to this as the moriora, the life force of all things. Now imagine fashion that honors the life force in every single stitch. You may open your eyes now and let's reflect upon what we've imagined. How different this is from the world of fast fashion that Sarah just explained. The clothes we wear today, as she said, often comes from sacrifice zones, places where both the land and the people are exploited. But what if, instead of extracting and exploiting, we regenerate, we uplift, we connect? What if fashion became that reflection of our interconnectedness with the earth, with each other, and ourselves? This is what fashion could be. This is actually what it must be. So the question I ask ourselves, what type of ancestor do we want to be for the future generations? Based on that question, we've decided that fashion as a commons could be that new North Star. Now, fashion, as we know, fashion as a commons, according to David Bollier, the commons are self-organized social systems for managing shared resources through cooperation, through customs, through protocols. Yeah, we know that. In fashion, how does that work? Well, it will mean it translates into creating systems where fibers and textiles, knowledge, skills are all collectively managed, but and not actually owned and exploited by those corporations, but rather cared for by communities closest to them. Now, fashion as a commons is not just simply about the resources. It's actually more. It's about the deep relationships that bind us. It's about ensuring that the clothes we wear carry the stories and the connections and the respect for the earth. Now, in Africa, this philosophy is the philosophy of Ubuntu. It's a worldview that reflects a deep interconnection of all beings, living and non-living, just as the commons operates today through collective care and shared responsibility. So too does this wisdom lie in all over the world. Now, Eleanor Ostrom's research actually has shown us that communities can actually survive and thrive and manage all of their resources without government interference, without protection policies, and definitely without privatization. After all, Indigenous communities have long known this, that when we nurture the world, when we nurture the land and each other, the land then in return nurtures us. However, as Sarah described, we do have a huge elephant in the room, and that is the topic of enclosures and sacrifice zones, which has actually been one of fashion's biggest issues. Historically, enclosures, as we know, have stripped people of their communal rights to the land, turning what was once shared and communal into private property, displacing large communities. Now, this dynamic sadly continues in fashion today, especially now in the global south, where traditional ways of life are being replaced by exploitative production in the name of growth and development. The results? The creation of sacrifice zones, places where workers toil in really unsafe conditions for meager wages and at the expense of all our natural resources. But what's worse is that these sacrifice zones are not just physical, they're cultural. The age-old systems of dress, of craft, are being eroded, and instead we see views like we see in this image in front of us: monoculture, globalized fashion system where you can't identify anybody's culture, values in any way. Everyone looks the same. Again, what if instead of those sacrifice zones, we created a world where fashion is built on local wisdom, on collaboration, and a pluriverse of diverse ways of being, where the makers themselves get to wear these creations too? I now want to introduce you to what is our common code and what we at Fashion Act Now and in the common market believe to be our guiding principles upon which we hope to radically transform the fashion system towards a fashion commons. Starting at its root, we intend to preserve biodiversity because fashion, after all, begins with nature. So by choosing regenerative fibers, we ensure that our systems actually do not harm ecosystems. Followed by an act of radical care, treating all beings, human and non-human, with fairness and dignity. Number 3, respecting cultural diversity, where fashion holds on to its stories and its cultures and actually uplifts these diverse traditions by resisting globalized fast fashion. Next, we focus on building community because after all, fashion should connect us, right, and not divide us. We aim to defend the right of self-expression, true expression, which then leads to a sense of deep belonging, followed by nurturing reciprocity. Whatever we take back has to be returned. What we take from the earth, we must give back. We must figure out a way for balance. Next, we aim to strive for sufficiency. Fashion must meet real needs, not just fuel overproduction. Followed by sharing our common wealth, which until now, as we know, doesn't exist. But by sharing knowledge and creativity, we can ensure that fashion is not just available, but it's actually accessible and we can all enjoy in those beautiful wisdoms together. Which leads me to practicing democratic governance, where fashion must be governed not simply by a few, but by all the knowledge systems, by all the voices, particularly those most affected. Not simply tokenistically, but really with a seat at that table. Which leads me to our last code, and that is the redistribution of any surplus. Surplus must support all the communities and not simply profit a few. Now, working in this space for over 30 years, I have learned a few things, and there's a few topics and provocations that I'd love to bring for us to discuss. And one of it was the challenge we're facing right now, navigating the tension between modernity and tradition. You know, many artisan communities, many indigenous communities are drawn to Western ideals of success, and as a result are abandoning the craft. And in doing so, cultural legacies are lost, and in some cases, and dire risk of being lost altogether. In Africa, we lose almost a language a day. Now, when we are trying to restore and help and co-create with artisans, we have to be really cautious, though. We have to support artisans without recreating harmful capitalist systems. And this actually requires for us to take a step back and deeply unlearn how we negotiate, how we engage, which leads me to the concept of deep time. Craft requires time, craft requires space. And for craft and artisans to flourish, we have to acknowledge that their wisdom is equally valued and be willing to allow for that to flourish by that standard. I'd like to leave you now with a thought. And the same question we started with. What type of ancestor do we want to be? And I urge you to take all our traditions and all our cultures and come together and walk in those traditions and in those cultures, remembering them backwards into the future. And in Te Reo Māori, that would be ka mua ka muri, together, all of us, walking backwards, leading us into a bright new future. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa.
Thank you so much, Karishma. Our next speaker, Ashish Kothari. I mean, it's actually really hard to introduce you because you have so many very highly notable accomplishments. But Ashish helps coordinate Vikalp Sagam, the global tapestry of alternatives and radical ecological democracy. He is the co-author, co-editor of Churning the Earth, Alternative Futures, and Pluriverse, a Post-Development Dictionary. So I will hand over to you, Ashish.
Thank you. Thanks so much for this opportunity. And thank you and Karishma for starting brilliantly. I think you already laid a fantastic ground for the rest of us and for the conversation. So given shortage of time, let me jump straight into it. And I think at least some of what I say is going to be repeating or building on what both of you have already said. Now, one of the ways we actually have worked on in India and with similar movements across the world is to look at reality or the current situation, the past, the current situation, and the future from what we call a flower of transformation. So here we look at the ecological, the cultural, the knowledge, the social, the economic, and the political aspects of life. This is obviously a somewhat artificial way of dividing life, but especially the intersections amongst them. And what I'd like to do in the rest of the presentation is firstly, very briefly look at the current crises we're in, which you all laid out also from this intersectional point of view, and then the solutions, the transformations that people are trying to work towards in various fields, including, of course, in fashion. Now, if we look at the current crisis, and some of these have already been mentioned by you, through the colonial period, for instance, and even now, even in so-called independent nation states, there's a continued erasure of cultural and knowledge diversity, attempt to homogenize everything, like McDonaldize all our food. One of the images that comes to mind, similar to the one that you showed, Karishma, I remember going to the conventions on biological diversity, where we had 180, 190 governments, and almost everybody would be wearing a three-piece suit or a Western dress, barring some of the African nations, and I think usually the Indian delegates who would wear their saris or their African traditional dress, right? Otherwise, everybody was, and mostly black. So it was amazing. I made that comment saying this is a global convention on biological diversity, but what's happened to cultural diversity here? So it kind of shows how over the last few hundred years we've attempted to homogenize and, of course, also privatize a lot of our culture and our knowledge. With society, of course, levels of inequality, many from the past, but many growing in the current situation. Economic inequality today, which is the highest ever in human history across the world. I'm right now sitting in South Africa, which is apparently the most unequal society in the world. And I think India is following closely. And of course, the ecological devastation that we have seen, the increasing threats to climate crisis. Climate crisis is no longer coming. It's already here and already affecting tens of millions of people. And growing authoritarianism across the world, the coming back of right-wing parties into power, and so on and so forth. So there's multiple crises. What's very important is to understand the intersections. So those who are already on the economic and social margins are the ones worst affected by the climate crisis, and they are not the ones who have caused it. Those who are rich and powerful are not so badly affected, and they're the ones who have caused the climate crisis. So we see these crucial intersections that have to be looked at in trying to figure out what would be our responses. Now, in terms of responses, we have the most amazing movements, moving away from the bad news, now coming to some of the good news. We have some of the most incredible ground level movements of resistance against the kinds of destructive processes of development and authoritarianism and patriarchy and so on that we still see across the world, but also constructing positive alternatives to meeting human needs and aspirations. Now, I wish I had an hour. I would have gone into many of these, which you'll now see popping up on the screen. And I love telling stories, so I could have told you stories about all of these or many of these, and I'm sure many of you can also. But why I think it's very important for us to look at these grounded alternatives, even though they are currently marginal compared to the macro political and economic forces that we have, is because these are where the seeds of transformation are present. And if we are wanting to get out of the global crisis, we need to nurture these seeds, make them saplings, make them trees, and then connect them across each other. Some of you mentioned the commons. Here in India, for instance, we have one of the most incredible initiatives by 5,000 Dalit, so-called untouchable women farmers, to create food security and food sovereignty with organic farming, their own seeds, their own knowledge, very small amounts of land. Showing the possibility of working with the earth, with their own knowledge systems, and commoning whatever they have so they can actually have enough and nutritious food for themselves, but also be able to sell some in the market. We did a study of the revival of handloom weaving in Western India. This is an unusual occurrence because handlooms or handmade products have generally declined across the world because of the influx of mass industrialized goods and the unequal economic context that they're living in. But here it's revived because of new products made from an organic cotton, which have caught the fancy of the market. And a lot of young people have actually also come back into the handloom weaving after having gone off to work in industries. So we use the flower of transformation to look at this change that is taking place. And we found some very interesting results. So here, don't look at all the text. If you only look at the bold green and the bold red. So we found increasing economic prosperity in the community as a whole as a result of this revival. We found that that was leading to reduced casteism because these weavers are all from the so-called marginal or outcasts, right? But they were now asserting themselves. We found that women were actually coming into the weaving process and being able to assert their own creativity and knowledge. A lot of design innovation taking place, even though the tradition, the weave patterns and all will continuing in as in the past. We found also that they were using organic cotton instead of GM cotton, and that was positive ecologically. But using the flower in an analytical way, we also found that there was an increase in economic inequality internally, because some of the weavers were able to reach the market, others were not. And we also found that ecologically it was contradictory or complex or mixed because the product now, instead of being sold locally, was being sold in Europe and New Delhi and Bombay, which means there was a huge ecological footprint of just the trade, right? So this is one way of trying to understand how either positive or negative or complementary or contradictory processes can take place when we do these sorts of transformations. Now, looking at the sorts of examples that we have from all over the world of what people are trying to do on the ground for constructive alternatives, what we see is sort of five in the same five spheres very quickly. Processes of people saying we've had enough of electoral democracies where we try and get a party to do what it should be doing for us, but it often fails. So we should be claiming power on the ground. Just to give you one example, in central India, a village which says, we elect the government in New Delhi. In our village, we are the government. Nobody takes decisions other than us, right? Exactly what Karishma you were pointing to in terms of radical governance, democratic governance. Economic democracy, where those who are putting all their sweat and toil into production should be the owners of the meal production, not a capitalist owner, not the state, right? And that could be land, it could be tools, it could be machinery, anything. But it's also about then self-reliance, localization of the economy, and not having to depend on for your basic needs on somebody 1,000 kilometers away, and of course the move towards commons rather than private. But these are also initiatives where people are struggling for social justice and equality, gender equality, for instance, the recognition of multiple genders and sexualities, against casteism in a society like India, against racism in so many parts of the world. These are then also, if you look at the fourth sphere of culture and knowledge, where people are asserting, sustaining, or reviving the diversity of cultural systems, which clothing, of course, is one, but for me, the most important is food and the incredible diversity of cuisines that we've had in the past, which are being eroded but are coming back. And knowledge diversity. Modern science and technology is not the only knowledge system in the world. There's many, many different knowledge systems, right? For instance, in health, India alone has 8 systems. And all of this based on, of course, sustaining the earth, without which we're all dead, whether we're rich or poor, right? So this is what we think of. And at the center of this core, at the core of this flower of transformation is a set of ethics and values, again, some of which you people have already mentioned. And here, to me, this is the most important message I am receiving from these grounded initiatives, which is not really about trying to replicate what those Dalit women farmers did or what you might be doing, Karishma, with your fantastic indigenous fashion thing or whatever. Not replicate it, but learn the lessons, learn the values, the ethics, the principles. Why are you doing what you're doing? What is emerging from it? And I've just put in red a few to me, which for this discussion are very, very important. But if you were to take all of these things together, especially the last one, then what we are talking about here is worldviews that celebrate life, where the celebrity is not Elon Musk or any of your fashion icons that you can think of, but is that Dalit woman farmer who on 1 acre of land is able to feed a family of 8 people without destroying the earth and sustaining her dignity, her knowledge, her holding her head up high. She's the celebrity, right? So we have to then be able to transform our society in all these different ways. Now, just quickly, and I'll finish in a couple of minutes. Khadi, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, the cloth or the process that Gandhi popularized during the independence movement in India against the British colonial things. What was very important about his message was that khadi is not just a cloth. It's about self-reliance, because everybody can make it. It's about creating livelihoods. Millions and millions of people could actually get livelihoods doing this. It's about being ecologically responsible, because you use organic inputs, you're doing handmade, etc. And it's about knowledge commons. Everybody can learn this. It's not privatized, etc. But this meets the holistic flower of transformation only if not appropriated by private capital, which unfortunately is happening now. So khadi has become fashionable, which means now, lots of people are making profits, and those in the villages who actually were making it are actually getting displaced. So we have to be very careful also on how we promote this. There are many, many such worldviews that celebrate life. The one that, Karishma works with, the Maori, for instance, have their own. Here in India, we have the one highlighted in red called Swaraj, which again Gandhi popularized, which is about self-rule, self-determination, autonomy, but with responsibility towards your autonomy, your freedom, your happiness, etc. And you're including other species, right? So looking at, again, life as a whole. So there are lots of these, and it's not just degrowth, by the way. There's a whole pluriverse of these, each unique, but also connected through those fundamental values. And that's where we are trying to then create the actual connections amongst movements all over the world, where people are trying to make these sorts of transformations, because we should not be alone. In order to tackle the macro political and economic forces, we have to be able to get together horizontally, non-hierarchically, recognizing everybody's individual uniqueness, but also the common threads by which we can weave this sort of global tapestry together. So this is something we launched in 2019, and it'll be wonderful to get more of the de-fashion world into this. Lots more on these websites. With that, I'll end my presentation. Thank you again for this opportunity. I also see here that I think I'm providing a little bit of gender diversity here, which in the reverse direction, which is, of course, nice to do. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ashish. And next, I want to introduce Ruth Ogier. Ruth works for War on Want, developing their international programs. So she's working with a wide range of civil society organizations, including social movements, trade unions, and farmers' movements. War on Want is a UK charity that works to end global poverty and human rights abuses. And they recently published an amazing report, Fashioning the Future, Fixing the Fashion Industry for Workers and Climate.
So, yes, I am going to follow on a lot of the themes that have already been mentioned, actually have already sort of come up. And I just want to say I might use the term big fashion, which Sarah really is your fashion with a capital F. And I've sort of entitled this ending, big fashion with justice, because I think viewing transformations where you have justice at the heart of them helps us to navigate not just change, but change that is better and just. And for clothing systems, I think we've already mentioned that there is some pitfalls that we can fall into, which one of them is the polarization, really, of seeing that we're somehow, big fashion presents us with this sense of a choice that, well, you can choose economic livelihoods, you can choose people, or you can choose the earth. And I think what we're all saying is that we want to challenge that and find these systems that show that that is a false choice, and that we have already in our past and in our present and in our futures the models of clothing systems that disprove that. So I, however, want to probably take a few minutes just to share what I think are some of the things we have to bear in mind in terms of, you mentioned, Sarah, around, when we're looking at change, being conscious around other people that are part now of these big fashion sort of systems. So I'm probably going to focus a little bit on some of those maybe bigger macro political and economic aspects, not as a depression, but to actually sort of bring out some of the, the work that aspects of our movements maybe are focusing on the unmaking of fashion, allowing and enabling more space for the remaking and regrowth and the rediscovery and the recovery. So moving my slide on now, I think what you can see is a picture, and this is just really what we know, but it's to put it in some visual form, that we see in terms of big fashion with the capital F, that major garment exporters are really a group of around 30 or so countries around the world. But if you look at the pie chart, you can see that that is the majority of those imports are going into richer and developed nations. And in fact, the US, UK, EU and the EU, they're over half that. So that is also telling us something we kind of know, that actually a lot of this production is unnecessary. And that doesn't mean clothing systems around the world are unnecessary, but what we have in big fashion is something for profit. At the heart of it, it's a profit motivator that is sort of driving this. The question comes up, though, if this industry does shrink dramatically, so if consumption and if that in those nations reduces, what does happen to jobs of tens of millions of people who are currently working in that kind of clothing supply chain? The latest estimate is that there's might be around 75 million people, and that doesn't even actually count a considerable number of workers who are workers of land, farmers, transport, distribution, retail. And so it is something that I think that as we rightly and properly nurture what are those alternatives, we also as a movement, as a collective of movements, think about, well, what is it that is holding this in place? And what is it that we need to sort of be aware of and trying to collectively change? Now, this slide, I think, is something I wanted to bring up, because often that question, oh, well, what about the jobs? Like I say, it can feel like it's a barrier to change. The quote here at the top in red, you know, I've met workers who've spent 40 years working in the industry, and the second generation of their family is now in the industry. They're producing for global brands, and yet they cannot afford to build a toilet in their house. So this disproves this idea that was sold, that, you know, opening up and the liberalization of trade, that the privatization, that these dominant neoliberal policies that were really promoted and expounded by sort of International Monetary Fund, World Bank, the World Trade Organization, you know, this idea that the place for countries in the world, predominantly those with from a colonial background, it was like part of a global economy, but who was that serving? And it was put out there as like these idea of it will be jobs and it will be etc. This quote really shows that for millions of people, that's just not true. These jobs don't nurture life. And that does not mean that in our transitions, we devalue those jobs or indeed those people, that we must think about how our economies can transist in ways that open up those alternatives. But one thing to bear in mind is that this system does hold countries in a sort of grip, a trap. So there is, as now this globalization requires, in a sense that, you know, countries are entering into garment export as well as food, as well as all these other things, to generate exchange, because paying debt, illegitimate debt, in a dollar, in a hard currency, paying for imports often of food. Now, in Africa, there's more food imported, and that is paid for in currency that's not your own. It's on those markets, and you have to generate that to pay it back. It is a vicious cycle, and it is a trap. Now, even if all of that illegitimate debt was cancelled, which we must sort of struggle for and aim for, if we don't tackle that underlying mechanism, the reality is that debt will reaccumulate. Now, in this system, as we know, companies which became brands because they weren't producing, they've become delinked from their responsibility for production in terms of people and in terms of the impact on the earth. And yet we also see that countries have become dependent, become really linked into a consumption in the global north. And the picture actually is not of garment workers, but of farmers, family farmers, who are experiencing this. You know, this story can also be seen in the production of our food and food systems globally. The infographic is a little intense, and it's really to bring out, I think, an important point that has already really been mentioned through Karishma and Ashish, that there is a theory around unequal exchange, and it's basically saying that that economic growth that is all, you know, the common sense, nobody must question, that's how things must be, that is driven in the rich global north because the vast quantities of Earth's goods and of people's labour is really appropriated for the production of these things. And in colonialism, that appropriation may have been more obvious, but today that still continues to take place through things like our trade systems, trade deals. It continues, as I say, by how debt works, by how tax works, how these regimes hold things together. I'm really sorry about this one because, as you can see, I struggled with something more creative, but there is just some new data, and I just want to not really spend too long on it because it brought out, this previous one was around Jason Hickel's work around what that drain from the, you know, from the global south to the north is, and it's huge. The debt is huge in terms of what has been taken. This is, you know, Earth's goods, it's people's labour, it's wealth in its fullest sense that's been taken away and cannot be used in other socially necessary, useful ways. And this is really where fashion sits, so that in 2021, all of the fashion that was consumed in the EU 27 countries, you can see there, where is that resources coming from? It's over 3 million human years goes into the production of fashion, only consumed within the EU 27. So imagining what could, you know, we talk about what about the jobs? I think what we need to think about, it was how else can 3 million human years be used? What kind, you know, of what we've been hearing, of socially necessary activities, care work, of health, of education, of protection. You know, there's so many things. What holds this back is that it is now being this infrastructure captures that really and pushes that into a kind of accumulation of profit. So I'm really sort of pinging out the question that Karishma and Ashish have already really more than ably said, but, you know, imagine what could really be achieved if economies of the global south actually stopped having to serve this model of the global north. You know, what would Bangladesh, for example, look like if all of those millions of years were not organized around producing garments, and of which I think it's about 8 cargo ships a year leaves the UK as waste. So we know it's a bit crazy. But the challenge does become how then those that time and natural goods are organized around socially necessary production. And that is where for every region, country and community, there will be different answers. But I think what we're trying to say within War on One is looking at how do we tackle that meta level in enabling then these systems around regional, country, community levels that can thrive. There's a phrase here about, you know, taught to prune the branches and ignore the roots. And I was struck by listening to what you were saying, Karishma, around communities and how people have roles in those. And I was thinking, if we can think about our justice movements in a similar way, that there are aspects of our movements that, you know, are the preservers and the generators of the seeds, of the ideas, of the new practices, of keeping hold of things. And then there are other aspects of our movements that maybe are orientated and tackling different things. But it does seem really important to me that as a whole movement, we understand some of and have some shared analysis of why, in simple terms, we might be in this mess, and be able to see our connections together, as Ashish said, globally, being able to connect our movements so that we can both resist and rebuild. I would like to end with maybe a few like quick little points on things I think is helpful, because I'm aware that this is just quite big scale. Things that we should maybe consider and bring to our minds all the time is how would we transform a system in ways that we're thinking about it internationally. And I think, Sarah, you mentioned, and I've mentioned here, when you look at that picture of where things are now, we know, for example, with COVID, as soon as any consumption patterns change in the global north now, clearly this model means that the repercussions of that hit those who are the poorest and are producing clothes. So we have to think about how we're building up and tackling so that it's not unbalanced. I would also say that we should be conscious around class in this. And I have a picture here which shows some workers in Sri Lanka who are on strike. They produce clothes for Asda, which is a supermarket in the UK. And they found out, kind of through us, through one-on-one, that actually there was workers for striking in Asda in the UK. And they immediately wanted to make those connections. It's a small example, but I think we should be very careful about how our movements don't fall into a trap of pitting a worker against a worker. But we must find solutions that enable economies to be truly sovereign, and for those communities, countries, nations to be able to generate and fight for and struggle for economies that are not linked to ours. And that's the way of, I think, of really stopping that worker against worker kind of battle. The other point I would like to make is that I think in resisting greenwashing, we do that to challenge corporates, but we should also be using that as much as we can to educate people and the ideas around sort of degrowth and alternatives. But challenging greenwashing, I think, is so important, not as a way of knocking down, but let's lift up those alternatives much more in how we can do that. It's an opportunity I see as educating, and finding those places for common action and solidarity is how our movements kind of move forward, together globally and together in terms of rooted in the class as well. Now, yes, I'm just ending with a link for the report, which does bring out in a lot more detail some of the things that I've rushed through, and particularly picks up things if you want to know more about, well, you know, what is it about debt or tax or trade, and what are some of the things that can occur there that could challenge not just big fashion, but you know, our systems more broadly. So I'd encourage you to have a look at that. It's not a blueprint, it's not an answer. I think it's us continuing to struggle and to wrestle with these questions about transformations. So it's offered in that spirit. And yeah, I will end there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ruth. So next in this program, we're moving on to an exploration of alternatives within Europe. So I want to now introduce Elise van der Laan, who works for Dutch sustainable fashion pioneer Jolien Jolink. She is also a researcher in sustainable fashion at Artes University. So it's an interesting story because Jolien Jolink moved her company to a rural area in 2023. And she started a fashion farm. So they now grow woad and flax with local volunteers in collaboration with the Linen Project and Fibre Shed.
Very well, thank you. I'll dive right into it. I work for the Dutch fashion brand called Jolien Jolink. Meet Joline. This is Joline in front of her store in Rotterdam. She started the brand with her partner Peter in 2006, so we've been around for a long time. And when I started working for Jolien Jolink in 2019, we were just a sustainable fashion brand. It means that for us, sustainability was about focusing on having better materials. So we put a lot of effort in finding the right organic materials, recycled materials, innovative materials. Just to give you a short introduction, the foundations of the company are that we only sell through our own channels. So we have a store in Rotterdam and a web shop, and that's it. We don't sell to other retailers. We produce in small batches. So we've been doing that for about 10 years now, which means that each month or each 3 weeks, we have a new drop of products, and it's all very small scale. So if we produce a pair of trousers, we make about 50 or 100 of them. We produce within the EU, mainly with companies whom we've known for a long time. So we've had, we always, before we moved to the fashion farm, we always felt like we are very much in charge of our supply chain, and we actually know where our goods come from, where our materials come from, and it felt like a very unique position. We produce from dead stock. About a third of our collection is made from dead stock, and the other 2/3 is organic materials, recycled materials, and innovative materials like using apple leather. We always try to use materials that are still in development, and because we produce on such a small scale, for us it's possible to have pilots, to try out things, to produce sneakers that we produced in the Netherlands, the first vegan sneakers. And since we're so small, it gives us the flexibility to experiment. And I think this notion of pioneering and doing things for the first time, it's really at the DNA of the company. So this is how things looked when I started there in 2019, and then the pandemic hit. So I think this was a very important time for us, and it's I need to share something on this for you to understand why we moved to a fashion farm. During the pandemic in 2020, it was the best year for our company ever. So we grew immensely. I think we more than doubled our sales, maybe tripled our sales. During that time, we had an interview in an influential magazine in the Netherlands. So we just got an influx of new customers. There was a lot of support for Support Your Locals. So we just had our current customers. We have a very loyal base of customers that sticks with us, and Jolina has very direct contact with her customers through Instagram. She kept on doing that during the pandemic, and we kept on growing and growing. And as a company, it was very strange and also very challenging. You see here this picture with all the boxes. I remember that my work changed from being in the store and having this direct interaction with customers to just packing boxes with clothes and sending them all over the Netherlands. This, on the one hand, proved that our system that we had been building up for so long, this robust system of our good relationships with our supplier, not having any stock, having this flexibility to produce almost on demand, it gave us such flexibility that during the pandemic, we saw other companies struggling that had a bigger stock or that produced without outside of Europe, and we felt it was a confirmation of, okay, so the direction we're heading in, it's the right one. And at the same time, it gave us a lot of time to reflect on what we were doing, and growing so hard just meant that we had to rethink what we were doing. Can we still produce 50 pairs of trousers? If they are sold out, they were sold out within a day. If we produced something new, we put it out on the website and it was sold out immediately. So we started thinking, do we want to keep on growing like this? And what kind of company would we become if we would do that? I think also this pandemic is a time of personal reflection for Jolina and for us as a team as well. And we started thinking about how we could grow in another way and what would actually be the way for us to grow. At the same time, I think Jolina experienced this desire to dive deeper into where do our clothes actually come from. So instead of just having the fabrics from our suppliers, getting to know, but where is this grown? Where does it really start? So we started doing some things, taking some small steps to see if we could head the company in another direction. I think some things we did was start really from the material that was local that we came across. I think Jolina was on holiday somewhere, and it was in a part of the Netherlands where there's a lot of waste wool. And when she saw this, she got really touched by this great wool as a great product, and it was just destroyed. So she wanted to make a coat out of it. And this was the first time I think we started building this value chain, trying to find where can we find this local wool? What happens next? Where does it go to be washed? So we started tracing back all these steps that happen. Normally the wool would arrive at our company when it was already knitted. And now we started to experience what it was like to start from the waste product and work it all the way up until it was a garment. I think we made about 15 coats that were made from this Dutch wool. And that was a very inspirational project for Jolina as a designer. Another thing we did is we made a jacket from Dutch linen. This linen was made by the Linen Project. This is, I think, our first interaction with the Linen Project, a foundation that tries to research how we can build local value chains for linen. So this linen was grown in the Netherlands. It was also woven in the Netherlands, which is quite special. And we also try to make it in the Netherlands. This, in the end, we couldn't do because of time constraints. And since we didn't have the infrastructure for this as a company, so we didn't have relationships with local manufacturing ateliers, which we do have now. So that's a change. Another thing we did is to think about our growth as not unlimited. So we announced a production ceiling that we promised ourselves that we would never overproduce. And after we grew so much as a company, we had to rebalance our production numbers. But we soon felt, well, okay, we want to stay a small company. We don't want to overproduce. It's still always tricky if you produce 200 trousers. You don't know if they will all sell. We don't believe in having sale. So this felt as a strong direction for the company to go towards too. And then after reflecting on this, I think for 2 years, we came up with a new vision of what kind of company we would like to be. And we thought it would be that our vision is to restore the bond between the wearer and the maker. It's actually a journey that Jolien herself made through having the jacket of Dutch linen and having the coat made from Dutch wool, finding this value of knowing where something comes from and how it makes you cherish your clothes. We experienced this ourselves as a team, and we felt it would be great if this could be a task for us, and we could tell this story and have the same for our customers. Another thing is to not only be a sustainable fashion company and use organic cotton, but to try to have a positive impact on nature and also on the local environment. I think this is also a time where Jolien started thinking about she grew closer and closer to nature during the pandemic, and how she lived in the city, and her company was founded in the city, but all her inspiration came from nature. So at this time, the desire came to move the company to a place within nature and to start working, to have nature as the central part of the company, to start all our activities from nature. And another dream that she truly felt was to contribute to a future economy that generates social, ecological, and financial value only in tandem. So also for us as a company, we started thinking about what kind of social value can we generate and what kind of ecological value can we generate. And this is still a journey for us, but it's been a really exciting one. So then last year in the summer, we found this place, we found a farm. I think we've been looking for it for 2 years. We visited many places, but very patiently, always feeling that at some point the right spot would come across. And we found this place, a farm in a region in the Netherlands called Overijssel, and it's actually the region where traditionally a great part of the Dutch textile industry was based. So it felt very logically to end up here. And I think ever since we moved there, we really feel like we've landed in a community where we really fit in. On the farm, there are 5 chickens. It's 1 acre, so it's 1 hectare. Don't know if that's the same word so it's small, but just right for us. There's a very big barn. There are 3 sheep that are self-shedding. There are bees there. And there's a guest stay for guests to come and enjoy and be on our premises. So this felt like a new start for the company and something very promising that could grow into this. This is when we moved to this place, we started envisioning what it could be like. And this is our vision for the future, where we want to use the barn to work on our vision to connect users, wearers of clothing, to where it actually started. So in this barn, when it's repurposed, people will have the opportunity to see how, for example, flax is grown. We have the opportunity to take part in the growing of flax, to do one of the processes themselves, to come help us harvest, to do some scratching. And within the barn, they will be able to see this is how linen actually is made and how other textiles are made. We can do the same for woad. We can show with the wool from our sheep exactly where it comes from, how it's processed until it becomes a sweater. So this is something we are working on now. As the bar needs to be repurposed, and this is a big project, this dream will become reality probably somewhere next year, hopefully at the end of summer. But in the meantime, we wanted to start and work on the land already, and also connect to the community that we now were part of. So in March 2024, this year, we started a flex class. We did this in collaboration. We're doing this in collaboration with the Linen Project and with the Fibershed Foundation, the Dutch branch. And I think this is really an example for us. It's the first time it's an experiment to grow flax on our own farm. We're not doing this for production. It's really for experiment and for the social value it gets us, and for the journey you make as a person to start with the seed and to end up with a piece of clothing. And ever since we started this in March, it's been a really magical process. When we put the invitation out for who wants to be a volunteer in our flex class, all sorts of people started coming to us. People that lived in the neighborhood, local artists that we had never heard of, a graphic designer that lived nearby and that wanted to work more outside. There was an architect turned farmer turned baker that came and that now bakes bread for us and wanted to join the flex class. There was someone else who moved from Amsterdam, so from a very busy city, to this region that is really, the place we're in is such a small village, and it was amazing how many people found our flex class and found this way to connect to each other, all with this shared goal of being outside more, connecting to nature, and also many, I think half of the flex class are people that moved to that region and that wanted to know more about, but what is this region? What is this ground that I am now living on? And the history of textile is actually a part of this place where we are at. And there's someone in the flex class who writes a book on her family's textile history. And I think the first night that we were together, we were sharing stories of why we were part of this class. And it was an amazing feeling to learn that with about 30 people, there's so much connection, and we could find each other in doing this work. And the pictures I'll show next, I think, really show some of this community feeling that we've been having ever since. We started sewing in March, as you see here. Then this is a quick step to June when flax was in bloom, and all these processes were so great to see. And Jolina has shared all of these on her social media channels to really see if we can engage people and take them into this process of growing some. This is the pooling that we did together. This is in August when we did the rippling. And I just wanted to show how doing something together, how it connects and how many things happen along the way, because more and more people started to find us. There's also new people coming to the flex class all the time. At the right, you see someone who's been working in the flex industry. So for about 30 years ago, he had all this knowledge of how flax was processed by hand. And we found him because he lives in the neighborhood, and now he comes and join our class. On the left, you see a neighbor who is actually a beekeeper and has a lot of knowledge on bees. And whenever we need a hand, she comes and helps us. Then there's two people there's one of the neighbors that made us make our own hackle, because we realized that doing this process by hand, processing flax by hand, it requires knowledge and also tools that no longer exist. So you have to find ways to find these things. So people started just making them. This is just in September. So we did the breaking, scratching, and the hackling. And now the flax is ready to be spun and to be woven. This is our flax. So we have about 2 kilograms of flax. And now the next challenging steps will come, because we will see if it's also something that we could commercially use. One of the first things we found out that if you have it spun by hand, since our quantities are so small, we couldn't do it on an industrial scale. The costs of it are 1,500 euros per kilo. So this would make this immensely expensive. So we're still thinking of other ways to do it, or to just realize that this is the true price if you work by hand on something. And what does this mean for the end project? And can we reach a consumer with it? Since moving on the farm, another thing we did was just trying to see, we're on this piece of land, what else can grow on this land, and what can we as a fashion company, how can we transition to being a company that just makes things that come from the land. So we also made our own soap of rosemary that grew on the land in the first year, and we grow our own woad that we use to dye Dutch woolen sweaters with. So all these things happening are experiments that will hopefully lead to a new type of company. Not only people find the farm to be part of our flex class, but there's also, ever since we moved there, we've had so many visitors, people just finding us on Instagram and giving us a message, can we come by? We had a class of 70 fashion students coming by. I think then to wrap up, as you see, for us, it's really a process of transitioning, and also to finding out how can we have a financially viable company that does all these things. Are we still a fashion company? Will we still be producing clothes, or will we be producing different types of values? Will we become an educational company? These are questions that we don't have any answers to, but we are, I think this will all unfold in the coming years. Challenges that I think we learned through price, the sweaters that we made that we dyed with the wool, the Dutch woolen sweaters, I think retail price will be 400 euros. That does not mean that we get compensation for our efforts. It's just the material and a little bit of retail add up. So what does this mean for the future? What is actually the true price? What is local? How should everything we make become as local as we are now making it all in the Netherlands, trying to make products that are entirely made in the Netherlands, or can it also be partly made in France or in Germany? Scale, that's related, of course. Legislation, also related. The role of the consumer, we're struggling with this as well, trying to find a way to involve the consumer as much as possible, and to also see what the consumer wants, how much do they want to be involved, and is our assumption really true, that if you know from the start how a product is made, does this actually increase the value, and does it cause you to cherish it more, to wear it longer? And what is actually a fashion design of the future? Are we still making clothes, or are we designing ecosystems?
Thank you so much for this introduction to Jolien Link. And Kavita, I'll hand straight over to you. I mean, you do many things, but you are the co-founder of Extant, a Mallorca-based initiative focused on heritage textile crafts. And I will just hand straight over to you. Thank you, Kavita.
Thank you very much. What I'm going to say in many ways is hopefully very hopeful and good news, because it's so exciting to hear all the things that you're talking about. And I loved Karishma's dream, and I just want her to know that we're working on making it come true. So Extant is a project that I do in Mallorca. And this is a project, it's an annual gathering. I call it the sort of like the Burning Man of textiles. I've dedicated my entire life to textiles and fashion. And I felt I really needed to work for what I loved, because it was being taken away from me. Everything I loved about the fashion textile industry was becoming a struggle, and I needed to stop complaining and do something about it. So we set up this project about 5 years ago. This has been our 5th edition. We felt timing was really important. It was the right time right now with the huge movement in technology and everyone getting so excited, the AI and machine learning tools. We seem to be hurling down a path where we don't even know where we're going. We're just, like little kids with a new toy, the artisans. The world is being led by these amazing technology people who are brilliant at solving problems. But could we, the artisans, help them by actually imagining a new scenario altogether? So we felt it was really important that we took active part in what was happening in how do we build a society. And of course, why us? Because of all the reasons why craft and craftsmanship is so important. It's so human-centric. It's so much about quality, which is what the economy needs right now. It is also about intergenerational, which is so important, of all the things that you've heard. So the very simple objectives Extant was, could we participate in birthing this new world, this new economy, this new way of living on this planet? I love the fact that we talked about interspecies. It's very much part of what we want to be, less all the other beings on this planet. So we came up with these 5 things that were really important to us, which was beauty, craftsmanship, community. Of course, it was about, time. That was the other issue that we felt that we were not touching, and we felt that we could come together and actually work on solutions. I'll very quickly tell you why me and why I'm at this point. So in 2011, I worked on a project called the IOU project, where I tried to use technology to decommoditize product, because I was obsessed with the idea that we could really change something with technology. And so I worked very hard with my husband, who works in machine learning and AI, has been a great supporter of my work from the beginning, about how could we give back the authorship to the craftspeople, because that's what I felt when I was wanting to. You can't have a coffee that's not artisanal or crafted. What did that word actually mean? And there was a huge industrialization of craft taking place. So I built this project with him, which was basically a traceability tool. We worked in Madras, India. I'm obsessed with the Madras check. In fact, I'm next week in London speaking about it at the V&A. And also because that's where scale was possible, to show that this can be done at scale. We bought the fabric from where it was made. We brought and made the jackets and the shirts in Europe next to where I live, because I felt it was important to do what Marco Polo did, which was, go out there to find the best of each culture and interchange it with the best of what we do, which is what we've done as humanity until recently, when industrialization has made us absolutely focus on quantity and not quality. So all our pieces are made in Europe. Fabrics come from India in this case, and each piece has a little QR code. We did this in 2011 when no one was using them, because it was the cheapest way for us to put all that traceability into the product. The end result was we could actually give identity and authorship back to the weavers. Why did I think it was important? I felt like, human beings get confused with numbers. I don't think we connect with people. We can't even get our heads around that. So I felt we could really, connect with human stories. If you knew the shirt was woven by Sambanthan and you knew that Alberto made the shirt for you, you treat it differently, because it was a human connection. And very important for us was that you as a consumer put up your picture so they could also have access to your information. This wasn't going to be a one-way. It had to be both ways. Information was for them as well, to do with it what they could. So we made a hashtag in 2011 called Who Made My Clothes. No one really cared much about it till 2014, 2013, when the Rana Plaza thing happened. So anyway, long story short, I've been working on this. We've been making this. I still work on it. We still work with over 230 weavers in South India, and we make all kinds of different products with it, and we sell it direct to consumer. And that has been funding all the other work that I'm doing, and I'll tell you about Extant as well, Reese. So we also, with IOU, opened that up, because we knew we couldn't just work with the weavers ourselves, do collaborations with other brands that were doing something we could learn from, not H&M, Marni by H&M, but really similar brands like our small brands who could learn from us, and we could learn beautiful tailoring. We learned about tailoring. They learned about handcrafted products. Just a little overview of what we do. Every single piece is made from handcrafted fabrics made in Europe here, and you can actually trace back to every piece. And it's sort of, our cult, where it's a very modern sort of unisex collection, but made out of these incredible traditional brands. The idea got a lot of attention. We won a lot of awards, and very quickly I was selling in many, many shops in all parts of the world. And I thought, oh, wait a minute, I'm getting sucked back into what I was trying to get out of, which is not to sell more clothes. We really want to make change happen. And that's the moment where, because I work with my husband very much, who works in tech, you kind of saw how tech was being used by other places, always to the best result, but really shifting the narrative. So, and I felt like our industry could really use that. So that's when I decided that what I really wanted to do, I continue to make Extant, but IOU, but I'm not going to just focus on how do I continue growing it. I let that, I let it be how it is, but I really want to share it with the community. If we don't build this community, if we just go into our own mode of my brand, how do I take it and make it bigger? We're not really creating a new system anymore. So I was lucky right after We did our first one in Mexico City, and it was just before the pandemic. It was a huge, huge event. And when the pandemic hit, the Mallorcan government, someone there had heard about what we had done, invited me to make Mallorca home. Mallorca is a great place to make it home. Why? Because Mallorca has a lot of really creative influence, lots of really amazing humans have moved there for many reasons. There's a huge regenerative economy already happening, but also Mallorca has a tradition in textile. They have an over 500-year-old textile tradition called the telas de yengua, and that got me even more excited, and we thought we could really work with them. So what do? The government gives us the most beautiful heritage patios, buildings, and we kind of come in there as a group, and we take them over and we convert them into what Karishma was describing to you. You walk into this place, it's beautifully, all of it, of course, is ephemeral, and we work with an architect who helps us to make sure that we leave no impact in these buildings, of course. Everything that we use, we reuse, and it's just made beautifully. We also are given other places on the island where we conduct different kinds of programs, leadership, educational, which I'll talk to you. We mix craft and art, because that's the other pet peeve that I have. If we don't make the artisan realize that what they are creating is art and put it right next to an artist's work, we're never going to go beyond that sense of that they're just a worker in a long chain. So that's the work we do. We get artists whose work is with fiber right next to an artisan who nobody probably knows about, but his work is like art, and put it together in this gorgeous space. It's the people who are chosen between 70 to 75 each year do not pay a single cent to be part of this. We fundraise to pay for everything. So it's not a traditional fair where your business model is renting space. This really is a community-based project where all of us come together. We help put it all together. Somebody's work can be right next to yours. It's all mixed in, and you're there to explain. We're so lucky we have over 100 volunteers each year who come in, fly in from all over the world to help us make it all gorgeous, to be there with the artisans, to help them communicate, also to connect the artists with the artisans, to maybe promote that. Run through very quickly, but highly, highly, highly recommend all of you try and come. It's really quite a beautiful, hopeful, and energizing event because of all the amazing conversations. The last year, we put up an artisanal fabric shop because we felt it was really important to give access to young people and not so young people who want to make their own clothes and could actually go and learn. So we do lots of workshops where you can actually learn from spinning, weaving, sewing, all kinds of techniques, repairing, mending, and of course come there. So who comes there? All kinds of people. We bring the best craftspeople from around the world. We are very focused on excellence, people who've really spent their entire life, as well as are part of communities that are very much about going forward. We're very focused on the we above the me. So if you want to participate, we always ask you about the we more than the me. And it's really gorgeous because you get the very famous designers right next to very well respected artisans. And the conversations that happen are just absolutely gorgeous. We also make space for very small, cozy, quiet conversations. Pascal, by the way, who is part of the original Linen Project, is now running a nonviolent communication program. And she comes there, for example, and holds one of that. How do we listen to each other even when we don't agree with each other? I'm just going to go very quickly so you see the sort of the conversations, the things that happen there. This last one, we had 75 artisan communities from over 35 countries, if I'm not wrong. What is really exciting for me is it's very intergenerational. So you have very young people right next to someone who's maybe 80 years old and who is so valuable because of their experience and what they teach us. Lots of hands-on, lots of hugging. We're all about, creating that community. You see how people respond to this. It is such the anti-fashion movement has supported us from day one. Really well-known artists, but also Nilda, who's an incredible artisan from Peru, comes every year to participate in this. How can you participate as an artisan community brand? You apply, you let us know you're interested, tell us a story you want to tell, and we have a panel that decides who can be given space. But you can come anyway and just connect with people. It's open to public. We work together to make it happen. there's just so many things I can show you. We've also involved people like thought leaders like Dr. Vandana Shiva, Satish Kumar, who've been supportive and have been coming to be with us, to talk to us, and to make us understand the work that we're doing, how important it is. We're very excited about the workshops that we do. This is really hands-on. You can come and play, learn, teach if you want to. And this part is really, you know, beautiful and powerful because you see how people's faces change. We also do lots of talks and round tables. People can propose, the community can propose ideas around which they want to talk. We're very focused on trying to give the voice to the global south, which we felt hasn't been heard. Whenever I'm invited to all these conferences around the future and sustainability, I see a huge lack of indigenous people who I think really understand and who we should be listening to. So we make sure we get them. That happens a week before, hand-selected 25 humans from all the applications that we get who come together and live together for a week before extant happens so that we can really be ready to receive the public. A lot of times, as I have personally been, when you're working in this, you're alone. You feel like you're going against the grain. You don't have mentoring. You don't have a space where you can just be airing out your doubts because you're either, you know, talking to investors or talking to yourself or talking to press, always selling your idea. So we wanted to create a safe space where you can come and air your doubts out. You can actually reignite your own passion, which is something that's so important for people who are working in this. Again, lots of hands-on work. Be really involved in my American community on the right-hand side of the most one of my American weavers who's involved. So I could go on. We don't have a lot of time. It's a really exciting project. I love what I do. We get lots of love letters from the world. We also do an exposition. The government's been giving us gorgeous spaces where there's been amazing. We've also been very lucky. We've had lots of incredible press. You were talking about making new mythology. Architecture judges flew in the last time. They asked us, who should they write about? We said, write about this man, write about the weaver. That's the new hero we want. That's the narrative we want to push. So we do a lot of that work as well to help tell these gorgeous stories. I'm not, you know, anyone who's interested, I'm happy to share later on. I know we've short of time, but most importantly to me, what I wanted to let you all know is that I think what we've, you know, as we're all saying, what we need to do really is just try and test and do. Make mistakes and work together and help each other try to do something new. Next year, we are starting already preparations for it. It's going to be from the 9th to the 13th of May. Every year we pick a word. The word next year is waka, which is a gorgeous word in the Quechua language, which means sacred, about the sacred. How can we reflect upon what is sacred to us as humanity right now at this moment where it seems we're going to go into warp speed into the future? Is that the future we want, or can we pause, look back before we move forward to really remember who we are and why we're doing what we're doing? But thank you so much. And like I said, all my information's there. Happy to answer any questions. And thank you to the rest of the panel. It's been really inspiring.
Thank you so much, Kavita. And Milja, I'm going to hand straight over to you if you want. Milja is an art historian and activist who's working in many different areas. And she leads 2 initiatives, Wild Bug Raid and For Less Waste, More Happiness. And please.
Hello, everybody. Just to say first that I have trust in this choir of voices, both lecturers and people participating. I have trust in us weaving one multifaceted story together. I am aware that we come from different backgrounds. I have prepared something, but haven't listened to everyone. I feel a need to also reflect on something that has been said and change my story a little bit. I hope it will be good. I would like to share with you what is the most vibrant part in me at the moment. And that is the fact that being part of many environmental stories, from the speaking for the non-human world, the zero waste, the cooperative housing, the urban ecosystems, the degrowth, the textile story, what I actually feel, and I'm sharing a place of vulnerability, is that that's the only place where I feel like the truth. And that's the place where I actually don't have all the answers. and I'm not sure about my ideas. I don't see the solution. I have this real questions about it. So what I felt working in zero waste is that actually what we mostly speak about is a kind of reaction to the system that is destroying the beautiful world that we are seeing. So it's a reaction, it's reactionism. And that actually when I really gave myself to zero waste for a few years, and I will speak from that perspective, I felt that the whole story about zero waste put so much emphasis most of the time on parts of circular economy and so on that are a reaction to the system that is exploiting the nature and people in the world. But then I felt that actually all the parts that are very regularly, no, we mentioned them, of zero waste, that are actually dangerous and exciting, are underplayed all the time. And I'm thinking about not buying, repurposing, borrowing, mending, repairing, all these things are actually something where the system that we live in is in trouble. That is the death of the system that we are living in. And so I wonder if, and I'm really glad that Elise mentioned it and said this beautiful story in front of us, coming from excitement about growth than to thinking about what growth is. I'm thinking of how can we actually include in the older fashion radical interpretations and this kind of assemblies, this kind of caution of not to change one market with just another market. Because even though the market that we are fighting for is beautiful market, I'm just thinking of how many of the clothing items that I have are not coming, they don't have anything to do with industry. And they are the ones that are filled with the most potent energy and that are actually the warmest. So I wonder if it's possible to somehow be resilient from the start, to think in that way, and to include the practices of mending, to include the fact that the item that we produced will actually last for a really long time, that we will not sell another one next year, and so on and so forth. That we include the fact that people will also be exchanging clothes, that people will be giving that as a present to each other, and so on and so forth, or making something for each other. So I invite us all to take that in consideration. I've put here beside me, and I'm looking at them, some of the objects. I will now very quickly go through them like some kind of slide, but with living things. So we all have this kind of objects. I'm completely aware of them. So this is a wool jumper that my mother made some 55 probably years ago while she was dating my father. They are still together. This is a shirt that I bought in my neighborhood, in my street, and it's actually made in the street where I live in. Most of it, it's sewn here, and the textile is organic cotton, and it's a really, really small producer. I have here with me a shawl that was, who knows why, made for me by my neighbor, a very old lady that was just speaking to me sometimes. And in one moment she said, I will make a shawl for you. And this is the warmest thing by far that I have in my house. And this is my laptop sleeve that I use every day for several years now. It was made by a really tiny nano micro zero waste brand that I had, textile brand. It's made for a thrown away beautiful textile. These are just a few of the objects that most of them don't correspond to the usual market sense and definitions, but they are the objects that are actually giving energy. And I really resonated with the flower that she shared with us. I am really seeing how everything dangerously changes when values are in the middle. I have a feeling that for many years now that contemporary man, this species of ours, is actually drinking salty water and trying to quench the thirst. We are taking inside of ourselves more and more of things that can actually never make us fulfilled and happy. We are a kind of a King Mida that wants to turn everything into gold and actually has a completely inanimate world and kills even his own daughter. That's how I see us very often. I would also like to share something. I would like us all, speaking again from this place of vulnerability, to invite us to challenge our imagination. What was mentioned somewhere of our impoverished imagination is a really a very important point, because I feel even these notions of North and South, I have a problem with them because I come from Serbia, from Belgrade. I can assure you that we are Congo of Europe. At this moment, we are in front of our very eyes, not on an abstract level at all, and not in future, living the dystopian stories that we hear in the news and that we are in a low voice speaking to each other, because our country is in front of our very eyes being sold out to Rio Tinto for lithium, for the green growth from the batteries, to the Chinese factories, in which we have a really already very visible rise of the cancer in the mining cities. Our biggest water sources have been sold to Coca-Cola. So, and just to make it even broader, I think that North and South, we should somehow remind ourselves that it's a question of domineering and exploiting, as we are exploiting cows in the meat and milk industry. We will do that to anyone that we regard less valuable and weaker, whether those are women or a whole continent or a country in Europe, or just use your imagination to, to put it that way. So I would like us to react actually in our own inner world to each of the moments like a bad seedlings, you know, when we use our power in a bad way. I would also like to share or react to what Karishma actually mentioned at the beginning of her talk, something about asking more from us. As an environmental activist, I realize that very often we focus our intention on reducing the negative impact. And when we say reducing the footprint and so on and so far, it's actually a very, very dangerous concept, because it is reducing a possibility of human life to just reducing the negative. So that's implying that we are a pest. We are only capable of that. I would invite us all to always think of both, and to always think of actually what good we are doing. So increasing our impact, not just reducing the negative one. And that's in line of really asking all of our practices to be healing and regenerative. I will stop here. I hope that I didn't overuse my time. Thank you all.
No, that was perfect, Amelia, and thank you so much. And I want to just pass straight on to Ivana Bjorchina. She is an author, textile engineer and researcher, and the founder of the Institute of Sustainable Fashion in Croatia, which focuses on local production, knowledge sharing, and building this regional community. So over to you, Ivana.
So I don't have a screen to share, I only have a story to share. So you will have to use your imagination. Let's begin. The story I want to share with you today is about my beautiful country and beautiful people of Croatia. So we are at this central spot between global north and global south. We could argue that we are the beginning of the global south. And we had these very specific experiences. Like, for instance, we experienced this compressed transition that maybe in the global north lasted for 200 years. We experienced this in like 30 or 50 years. And one generation ago, in a lot of our families, our parents were peasants. and my generation in a lot of the families was the first one to get a higher education. My generation is the last one to remember what does a different system feels like and looks like, because we lived in socialism with a capitalist twist. And we remember what it means to live through a war, which is very important today, and to know what devastation for generation it brings. We have witnessed how greed and corruption can, in a decade or even a few years, like completely destroy an industry, like textile industry, but a lot of our, like most of our industries were destroyed in the 90s. And we could see how rapidly and accelerated consumerism can, in one generation, wipe out the connection to the land and to the craftsmanship, and can drain the spirit. So we are small, but I think that our Balkan and Slavic people, we are known for our strong hearts and our big hearts. And something that I think today is a central point, because we are all required to dig deep into our hearts, to feel it, to speak it, to act from it. So that is something that I will do today. And thank you for hearing our voice. So in the last 2 years, we have become Croatia is part of the European Union, and we have become a part of a Eurozone. So Euro became our main currency. We had like our Croatian currency. And as most places, this practice has been completely devastating. People are on their knees. We have seen like complete disappearance of middle class. Poverty line has shifted drastically. And we all know that this decade has been challenging for all of us. But I think that when times are demanding, when life is raw and in full speed, we have two options. We all know them. Like, first is to zone out, isolate ourselves, just completely shut out, or to revolt, to rebel, and to make a choice to build something better. And I think that the choice is clear. So, but what does it look like in practice on the ground? So I can tell you firsthand, as I would call myself a recovering theoretician, that like theory and words, magnificent, but it's one thing, and then when you try to work it in the practice on the ground, it's something completely different. So I live in the countryside. I moved here 2019. I was born and raised in a small town, so this is just natural state that I'm suited. But this was the only place still, it's like 6 years ago, that you could maybe buy some land and maybe dream of building a garden, grow some food, and build a home. So as you can imagine, in the last 2 years with Euro and Eurozone, this has become a distant past. But it was crucial for me to have some land and to grow some food and to grow some textile plants. I'm still renting, not owning. Hopefully that will change soon. But it was crucial for my work, for the well-being of my work, but also for the well-being of myself. Because when I'm working with the land, when I'm near the forest, near the water, it grounds me, gives me roots, centers me. I can be full, inspired, and I can give to my community from my fullness. Regarding my textile practice, so it was also crucial for me, as examples in this conversation have been made, to have access and to grow raw materials, linen, cotton, nettles, still not hemp, but so I produce the very, very small amounts, and it's just symbolically, but it has proven for me to be the only way for me to connect deeply to my roots and to my craft and to the soul of my craft and to my soul, and once again to give to my community from my fullness, and to be rooted in real hope, because I could see on the ground, in the like working with the land, working with the textiles, like I can see it, I can feel it, hope, and I can share it like honestly. So my small local business is called Institut Održive Mode. It translates into Institute for Sustainable Fashion. It's not an institute, it's not some kind of public service, it's just a small local business, but I named it specifically because it's an experiment, some kind of organic transitioning, growing like experiment in action. So I produce very, 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 very small amounts of clothes, not as examples like one item in just one item, and that's it. Most of the item I've made it were like one item. So it's just like one item per time. And it's at prices that are available to my local community. And I'm working with local craftspeople, and equal time that I'm spending making this clothes, even more time I'm focused on education, bringing people together, bringing world-class experts, learning, breaking bread together, like sharing hugs, and just this is so important. So the clothes are a way for me to make an income and be financially independent. I have come to realize that it's crucial for me to have an income that is independent, that is not from grants, from projects, and even from services, because there is some raw empowerment that comes from when you make something with your hands and you put all your good intentions in it and you make an income from it. And also it gives you freedom to work and speak your mind, and to have some space to experiment and to push, and to work only on things that matter, and to be quick on your feet, see, this is now most important, I can just swipe like that. And something that I think we didn't mention today, to have boundaries, to not be 24/7, small local business, I'm available all times. No, have boundaries and to have time to rest so I can be full and give from my fullness. So building something new has its challenges, as it's been said today, like you don't belong to the old, you don't belong to this new that is emerging, like this new in the old clothing. And then however you reshape it, however you turn it around, you cannot escape it. You have to produce, and you have to produce more and more, and in a continuation of time. Now, what I've come to realize very soon is that if I really want to focus on building something new and alternative, I really have to cut all ties with the old, like just a straight line. No, it was really draining my life force, my creative force, my focus, my hope, and my well-being. Now, Croatia, as small as it is, and being this north meets the south spot, can give you a clear vision. I think that maybe in some places is not quite visible. Now, I can tell you what I see here. The old is dying, and if we're not careful enough, it will pull us down with it and all our good intentions with it, because there are still a lot of things that we need to let go. As industrialization began with advances and expansions made in textiles, I think that the death of an era is visible in its beginning in textiles. A small-scale Croatia can give us the answer here. What will keep us going under is not the euro, the inflation, the currency, Eurozone, not having raw materials. It is the lack of support and community. When people chose to isolate themselves and fail to see the connection, that all is connected and that we are all connected. But like the main thing that you learn when you work with the land is that renewal is a constant. So hope always reshapes itself. This is in a part of where you find a community with small gardeners, enthusiasts, plant enthusiasts, food growers, with people who you can exchange harvest, support each other in fruits or in kind words, teacher people from region and from all over the world. Now we all share the same vision of what good life is and what it should be, and we're all just trying to make it happen. With only one firm answer, I can assure you that, and that is that we really don't know. And the only thing that we do know is life is good and life should be good. So the main lesson is we really don't know. And we are all trying our best. But we should really be careful where we put our focus, our spirits and creativity at, what we feed and what feeds from our action, what we are sowing and what we are growing, as that will be planted in our common garden for the seasons to come and for the generations to come. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ivana. Like, what a wonderful way to end this part of the program. And I know we're way over time. So I understand if some people need to leave. But I do hope that we can ask at least one question that I had for the panel discussion that we ran out of time for. And I think it's quite clear from what we've been talking about that we need this kind of new idea of what prosperity is. And you've all put that into this wonderful, you've all illustrated it in your own ways. But we know that we need these kind of relational reciprocal clothing systems, but this means we need changes to our economy and ways of living. This is the heart of the issue. And quite often what I hear is that really possible? Can we do that? And we've seen that it is possible. But I wonder if we can talk a bit about, you know, what does this require? Is it possible? How can it happen? How do we change our economy and ways of living? And I wonder, Ashish, if we can go to you, because we kind of started with you, and yeah.
Thanks, Sarah. Well, firstly, I think this has been a really amazing set of presentations. I've learned a lot because I'm not in the fashion industry myself. So it's just very inspiring to hear everything that's actually happening on the ground. Yeah, it's wonderful. So thanks to everybody. Well, I mean, that's a question that can take many hours from all of us, I guess. So just a couple of points, since we're running out of time. I think one is we have to do the work of dreaming, imagining, and conceptualizing and visioning the alternative world, right? Economy, of course, but also politics, culture, society, etc. Because in our sort of mad everyday life of trying to do action and keep up with whatever's happening, we tend not to do this kind of dreaming. So one of the things we do in our Indian National Network on Alternatives is to do collective visioning. What's the kind of India we want, right? And this is across all sectors, all geographies, all cultures. And we need to do this locally, nationally, globally, whatever spaces we're in. So that's important. But then the second thing is to sort of come back down to where we are right now, to earth, and say, okay, how do we get to those kinds of visions? And for that, these stories are really, really important. So much more storytelling through audio, through visual, through art, through articles, whatever forms we are good at, of these fantastic things that are already happening. Because, you know, when I talk to young people across many parts of India and elsewhere in the world, they're frustrated. They're extremely anxious about the current and the future, and they're looking for pathways. Now, the industry, I mean, as in the sort of capital industry, the advertising, the state, etc., those who are pushing for religious homogeneity, etc., they're very good at reaching young people's hearts with messaging that is completely cynical, but it reaches people's heart. You say that, okay, you don't have a job, it's because of this migrant who has come, or this refugee who has come into the country, or it's because of this person from this religion, or whatever. We need to be able to get across to young people saying, look, there are fantastic, exciting pathways where you can get dignified, good livelihoods, where it's enjoyable, where you're not going to be, where you're actually going to be working with other people, etc. Those stories become absolutely essential for us to be able to move into this economy. And the last point I would make is that we need to be in solidarity with grassroots resistance movements, even as we're showing the alternatives. Just to give you one quick statistic, just 20 anti-mining movements, anti-oil, anti-mining movements in the world have been shown to be stopping carbon emissions equivalent to United States' entire carbon emissions in 1 year. And there are hundreds of these grassroots resistance movements. We need to be able to support them because they're constantly threatened. They are alone very often. People are being killed, people are being imprisoned, beaten up, etc. So those of us who really care have to be speaking up in support of these movements. So I think these are 2 or 3 things. Of course, This is very simplistic, but a few ideas. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashish. And I think actually, Ruth, it would be really nice to take that over to you now. Yeah.
Yeah, I really huge round, you know, with what Ashish has just said, absolutely right. I think when I talked about greenwashing, it's because greenwashing is trying to sell us the same thing. Yes. And so we have to, in all our areas, so, you know, fashion, food, whatever, energy, these areas, we have to be alert to what are the tactics that are trying to just tell us the same old thing, but tweaking the bits. What we have here, what we've been hearing about, these are the alternatives, and there is a work to do for these to be connected globally and across scale levels. That's why I talked about class, because what we have to try to find ways of doing is, as I said, that these alternatives should not be seen as threats, that degrowth isn't less for the least, it's better and dignified for all. Yeah. And I think we have to really try in all our areas when we communicate to be able to have that bigger global picture, even though we're operating rightly at a community and level. But how do we see that and offer in ways that we can connect it? And I also think, yes, that the you know, some of that can feel very big and overpowering, but the very reasons why it's important for those grassroots struggles, why it's important for all of the work that we've been hearing about today, why it's small farmers who are preserving the seeds and refusing to give up those seed banks. That's a resistance and it's our hope. And we find those in each sector. And we also need in our movements to not divide ourselves. We need to sort of connect and be able to understand and have, I think that's where the shared analysis comes in. There is an analysis and we might be entering it at different points and doing different parts of that struggle, but there is, we need to be inclusive of all. I can say for myself that War and Want as an organisation is learning to not just be that economic justice, you know, sort of frame, and actually having to broaden its understanding of dignified life. And we need to come together. So yeah, I do feel that it's about that trap I spoke about. We have to find the ways of releasing some of that for this energy and these alternatives to come through, because we can't have them as threats and we can't have them as the minority. These need to grow and become the big picture. So doing that requires some element of tackling the big beast. That's slow, but that does not mean that we don't grow and continue to grow. Just like farmers, you do that each season, yeah, and you harvest. So totally agree with what Ashish said and what being saying here. So yeah, I hope that's answered some of it, but certainly the values, that prosperity and understanding that differently, not less for those that have the least, which is what we need to speak to about working people when they're told, oh, well, you know, it's degrowth or it's having less or having to have a subsistence. We need to retell that story in ways that tell people that is prosperity. Yeah. Not profit. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I don't know if any others want to chime in there.
I just wanted to couple of points that I felt that, you know, I love the word degrowth because, and it scares a lot of people because in economic terms, it feels like we're all going to have less because we love the selling of scarcity. In fact, in our world, scarcity is luxury, whereas it's not, it's never been. But I think that when we talk about degrowth, we have to also talk about the fact that what are we degrowing in, because there's a huge growth opportunity in the other part that we haven't touched, which is in my industry alone, which I say fashion textiles. I'd say we need to degrow in the physical, but we need to grow in the educational, the material, the way we do the thing. So, you know, there's a beautiful, while I was working in Chiapas, I learned also, for example, growing corn the way the farmers in Mexico do through the milpa system actually gives you per square hectare more calorie than growing corn in the industrial American system, which is super subsidized, hugely toxic, and, you know, a very extractive way of doing things. So I think it's also about, you know, defining success in a new way, and very much what, you know, Ashish was saying, how do we tell these stories? And I think that's kind of where sharing what we have, what we do, and that's one of our big things at Extant. We're like, come tell stories. This is a platform for everyone, because we do need to talk about these things and show people, show all these, you know, young people who are frustrated, anxiety-driven, that there is an alternative. And that alternative is called hard work. It's about getting your hands dirty and building it. We've seen it in India. You know, we've had the good luck of being a father of our nation taught us. It's as simple as that. You don't want something, you stop participating in it. You build an alternative. My grandfather, who's lawyer, stopped being a lawyer and became a spinner, you know, in his house, and went as a young man walking with Gandhi, like many people around. I have the luck to work with Satish Kumar. He walked from India to Moscow to wherever, just walked. These are, you know, small things, very powerful things that actually change you and change everyone around. So it is the fact that just doing us in our little time that we have, if we have to pay our bills, we do whatever we need to do. But there's always an hour or two in your day in which you can be rebellious and build the new system, because time is the most important asset we've got. And where are we going to be? And who we are, the investors in the future. If we, you know, consider ourselves such, then we will invest wisely, however little time we have to invest in that future.
Thank you so much. We've got a few more minutes, I think we'll spend on this panel if we can. And I kind of want to bring up something that we see as a point of contention, that of this kind of building ties between craft production and industrial fashion as a way to ensure a kind of perpetuation of tradition. And I think maybe I'll start with Karishma and then maybe hand over to Ivana. With this provocation. Of course, you can also respond to what we've just been talking about as well, this change in economy.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, everyone. This has been amazing. And I think everyone has kind of added so much value to this very topic. This isn't an easy one because, I mean, I think I am cross-cultured of two indigenous ways of living, and I grew up in this cross-cultured duality. And as a community, myself, we have experienced this desire and this allure for modernity, only then to achieve certain things and then realize, well, hang on, that's not necessarily what's adding value. And it's been a constant struggle. It's a struggle for me with artisanal communities that I'm still in very close contact with that have abandoned their crafts, the silk weavers in Hoi An, to the silversmiths in Indonesia, and so on. And I feel that I feel that on one hand, I can understand the desire of the parents and the family and the community for wanting that better life. And, you know, as Ruth mentioned, it's and Ashish, it's the packaging of this better life and reframing then what is better, and is it really better? And I think that we, in the modern world or in the Western world or in the European context, we can have a part to play in that. And I think that comes from the way we can begin with the way we engage in this world. And for the most part, with the exceptions of Khmer and the like, so for the most part, the way Westerners have, you know, generally engaged in the artisanal communities, even in the West, has been to extract, not to actually bring that community to the table and say, we want to actually engage in your knowledge. And this comes directly from a few communities, because I asked the silk weavers, who were 6th generation silk weavers and 3-generation friends of mine, why is it that your kids aren't following this path? And the idea was, well, Krishna, there's no future. Who wants my little 60-inch weave that's going to cost $500 US to actually produce when they can just get it from China? I can't put my kids through that. During the pandemic, you sent us money. We didn't have any. We couldn't live. Now, if we could have this community at the table to talk, to make the decisions that we are wanting to shift, the narratives we are wanting to shift, then perhaps those children, as Ashish had pointed out, those next generations are going to be inspired to want to come back and revive. So for me, it's a delicate balance. And I do believe that the modern world can play a part in it positively. So I'm going to leave it there, and it's not a full answer. Perhaps somebody else would like to add into it.
Yeah, it's a tough one because as Karishma said, like I think that the biggest provocacy here is that there are no straight answers in the industry or in the life that we're living right now. So yeah, I think that Croatia could also be a cautionary tale here, because we did put our traditions with all into this dream of industrialization, and in like 10 years we could see all the tradition was gone. So I would be very careful with it, because I think that industrial way of just working, imagining, intention in the industrial way, and every part of the process is completely different from a traditional way of working, because tradition for me is a way of life. And we can wrap this with this question of economy, because I think that nowadays way of living is economy. This modus vivendi is economy. And I think that, yeah, as I said, a lot of things to let go, a lot of beliefs to let go. And I think that the best way to live this tradition is to like have it in your heart, your grandmothers, your great-grandmothers, and just weave it into this new way of living that we are trying to build. I think this is the only way to honor the tradition and the hard work of everyone that came before us, and to build something better. That is the most radical way and the best way to honor the tradition, and just to live and to build a new way of living, and the economy and everything will just follow.
Thank you. And Elise, I wonder if you want to kind of talk about some of the perhaps challenges of working in this very different way that you've transitioned to.
I loved hearing these different perspectives from Serbia and Croatia, because it has some similarities, but it also brings to light the very different context of being in the Netherlands. I think some of the challenges really have to do with price. So the things that, and also the question of how much value does the local have? I think we really started to believe in this thing that by doing as a consumer, by taking part in fashion, by doing something yourself, even if it's just listening to a story, or by growing your own flags in your garden, having the possibility to dye yourself or to do some stitching yourself, we believe that for our customers that will help them cherish their clothes and to increase this value. But as a company, having all these multiple values that we're creating, I think that's the challenge. The challenge will be how to, if we're not a foundation, but we're a company, where does our income come from? Is it only this type of consumers that have our clothes? Can it be people that we give experiences to? Can we share our stories in different parts? What I heard today is also from Ashish, the fact that you give perspective. I think we see that now with fashion students that visit us, that for them it's the most important thing of their visit is to connect with nature, and also to feel that there's a spectrum for a fashion designer of the future. You can just stay in the system and make clothes. And as a company, we are, by the way, also still doing that, but we want to transition step by step. But for them, I saw for students opened their eyes to see, oh, I can do something different as well, and then I'm still designing. So I do feel that moving into this educational part will be a big part of our future, and how to do this while still being a company that sells clothes. I don't know how we can combine these things, but I think it's interesting also to see how other fashion designers maybe do this, and we can learn from this and try to find a new way of being a company that adds value. And another thing I wanted to say, I heard some other people saying this, that clothes are a way, and I think for us it's a very powerful way. So that's why for now we are still making clothes, because it's a very powerful way to tell stories. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you. And Milia, lastly, I want to pass back to you. And I wonder if you want to say something about this new ideas of prosperity, or just respond to what's been said already. Yeah.
Well, we somehow all touched it, but I have this feeling that it's not possible to live the way that our ancestors lived. I very often feel that we have our own task, like when you are a kid in school. We cannot return, it's just not the way. But it's something very close, like what Ivana mentioned just a second ago, of how to honor it, how to really respect it. Then it is alive. And then we are actually weaving it into our lives, and we are doing that, but doing it differently, doing it in a contemporary way. So it's not enough, and it's not possible. There is a saying by Basho, the Japanese thinker, we should not follow the footsteps of our ancestors, but look for what they were looking for, which is a very different position in a way. And what I shared at the beginning of what I spoke about is this place of, and on which Ivan actually ended, is this how to be with what we do not know, how to be with staying with the trouble, in a way, as Joanna Macy says it. But for me, it's that question. How can I not just critique on the outside what I see is the problem? How can I catch in myself the lies and this yearning for comfort, or this settling with the ideas that I have around me already? Just I speak a phrase and I hear that it's false. It's true, like that's the one that I have at the moment. But there is something I feel in the moment that we are living, which is, I would also like to share this. I'm an art historian, so I'm always thinking in like thousands of years and how our society lived. Almost none of our ancestors lived with the level of destruction that we are living now. So even though we, in a way, alienated ourselves from the living system to which we belong to, so we are a part of it, we are not separate, it's not duality. But even though we distant ourselves, we are attuned, our whole bodies, you know, that we feel the smell of the earth better than the sharks feel the smell of blood in the ocean. We have a more capacity to smell the earth and know what earth needs than sharks have to provide their own food. So I think that we are completely attuned also to this destruction that is going on. And it's a heavy burden we are struggling underneath it. So I have compassion for the extremely difficult times that we are living in. And I think that this, what Ivana mentioned, this very strong orientation towards what is, and Ashish also mentioned it, towards, maybe everyone mentioned it, or we heard it in Elisa's voice when she spoke about the farm, but it's orienting ourselves not to this zombie-like necrophilic desires that are completely destructive for many generations to come of many beings, but to have this, our inner compass, be oriented towards where we feel life, where we feel joy, where we feel creativity, where we feel something bigger than us flowing through us. And that is a kind of, for me at least, it's not just poetic, it's very practical also. To connect on a daily basis, to remind myself, how do I feel about this? What is this doing to me and to people around me? And then take that as my compass, actually.
Thank you so much.
I'm sure I replied to some questions. Maybe not the one that you asked me, but
I think this was a really wonderful way to end that part of the program. And I'm now going to hand over to Kirsten, who's going to present the whiteboard that we can't see Lara, but Lara's been working very hard on this while everyone else has been talking. So over to you, Kirsten.
Hello. Yeah, I'd just like to thank the amazing speakers that we've had for such an inspiring and thought-provoking and stimulating morning of discussions. And I'm going to summarize now from the whiteboard notes that Lara's been frantically making, because it's been so rich. There's been so much incredible discussion this morning. So some takeaways in the green post-its, Karishma asking, what if fashion was a force of healing and care? What might that look like? You know, it doesn't have to be the way it is. And then a sheesh, which I can't quite read. There we go. Revival of handloom weaving in India has increased prosperity, reduced casteism. Women are included in the weaving process. Design innovation merges with traditional practices. So the power of clothing systems and material fabric systems in bringing about social good is really potent, really moving, and something that we can harness for the good of humanity. There are many alternatives and we need to connect them. Absolutely, a pluriverse of approaches. And then Elise, will we still be fashion companies? Do we have a different value now? I think the question, so next to that, are we still making clothes or are we designing ecosystems now? And I think that in the broadest possible sense, including humans. Fascinating. And, you know, maybe a call to action for us all. Ancestral knowledge is essential, yes. And then Melia, we often focus our narratives on reducing the negative rather than increasing the good impact. And yeah, there's been clues, there's breadcrumbs, aren't there, through the forest to the gingerbread house of ways that we can do things better from the discussions this morning. We must question North-South dynamic. Eastern Europe is also a place of capitalist extraction. We need to see this in terms of power imbalances. Absolutely, you know, and I think, you know, even in the UK, we have sacrifice zones. We've created an awful lot elsewhere, but we have our own sacrifice zones to the monster that is industrialized fossil fuel fashion. Ivana, important to make connection to the land community, grow small amounts of textile for hope, as a symbol of hope, a symbol of alternative ways of being and doing. Devastation for Eastern Europe, lack of community and connection. I think that's associated with the loss of the textile culture in Eastern Europe, its industrialization and becoming this driver for profit for the few rather than well-being for the many, prosperity for the many. And Kavita connects artists with artisans. I think, yeah, that idea that craft is less than, or you know, not amongst this audience, obviously, but it has certainly hear that from fine artists in the past, that it needs to be valued in the same way, and the importance of authorship, I think, is key to that. Visitors take part in workshops, learn skills, crafts, make connections, very, very intergenerational, and I can totally recommend Extant. I had a blast there a couple of years ago and hope to go to the next one. Ruth, debt creates a vicious cycle. Garment producing countries don't have food and economic sovereignty. Yeah, there was a question you asked that how would Bangladesh look if it was not producing for the economic interests of the global north, or Western Europe and America, I guess. And so important to imagine alternative ways of being, doing, living. think about transforming systems internationally so change is not unbalanced. Let's not pit worker against worker, but connect worker struggles. Absolutely. And yeah, I think I'm back round in a circle then from Karishma. Sarah, change in Europe must consider communities across the globe. Yes, and that's the thorny question, isn't it? How do we look after, it sounds so paternal, but how can we mutually protect the interests of those who might be disadvantaged? We can't go off a cliff edge, but we kind of need to. So how can we make that transition? And I think Ruth was talked about, you know, a different way of producing doesn't have to mean it doesn't have to mean loss for those people who are producing in those countries that we are shipping our production to. Okay, that's my summary. And amazing talks. Thank you all so much.
I'll just say a few final words in that we are our common market, and our website is now ready for people to join our common market. If you run a community-based practice, we would love to put you on our atlas. So if you go to the OCM Atlas, you can fill out a form and we will put you on there. You can become a member and get involved. We are a collective that is running our common market. And if you want to list events, please email us.